17 people in the city have been dismissed for misconduct. Our coalition in Tshwane has shown ourselves to be resilient, continuing ANC one-party dominance, continuing state capture, corruption, self-enrichment, decline of the developmental capacity of the state, schools, hospitals, roads, infrastructure. We have to break the stasis and, in fact, the decline that has become a feature of South African life under an ANC dominant party democracy.
They say that all politics is local. Everything that really matters, we are fixated on the national government and who's going to be the president and which party is going to be in power. But at the end of the day, you get the bulk of your services and delivery at local level. And I think it's important. We have focused heavily on the state of the nation, on the upcoming general election, and we've covered it to a large degree. But I don't think we've got to lose sight of what's happening at the local level. And nothing is more important than our metros. And joining us today on the State of the Nation is the Mayor of the city of Tshwane, Cilliers Brink. Cilliers, welcome back to
Mike,
the State of the
Nation. Great to be with you again.
Yeah, and I've got to remind you and everybody who's watching us that this episode is brought to us by Pace Car Rental, because even we've got to pay the rent because we don't get government salaries. You guys, so now let's talk about the city of Tshwane, because obviously going into the whole election cycle, city of Tshwane was all over the news, right? It's obviously a sore point in the ANC's machinery that they don't have the mayoralty. We know what they've done in the city of Joburg, Ekurhuleni, where eThekwini, where they've mortgaged the future in getting those metros under their control. There was a big pushback in the city of Tshwane, but you're a mayor with a majority, and you walked into an absolute storm, right, with a big strike. Obviously, the municipal workers, we're trying to sort of make it difficult for you from the inside. And we saw you collecting rubbish and doing all sorts of things in what was a social media coup. How are things going in the city of Tshwane?
Mike, let me just push back on one thing that you've said. And it's not really a pushback, maybe it's just a bit of perspective. So politics is local, people experience what the municipalities and the metros do. But at the same time, only 10% of all fiscal transfers in this country go to local government. There's this enormous burden of expectation on municipalities. And yet we are still very dependent on national government giving us, in their wisdom, what they think we need in order to fulfill all of these expectations. The other thing is that local government still operates within the framework of national laws. Land grabs, incentivized by national legislation. The courts say municipalities have to provide alternative accommodation in cases of eviction. Even now, in private property evictions, municipality must provide. So we go through a development plan process, a budget process, and because of national laws, and I can mention others, our dependency on the South African police, the fact that law enforcement has broken down, now we've got to spend so much on security, basic security, which is meant to be a policing function, that we don't get to spend money on other developmental needs, water, electricity, and so forth. So I think it is important to know that, yes, we mustn't forget about the metros and municipalities in the national election, but also the results of that election will be consequential for the metros and local government, because we have been starved of resources systematically, especially in the past 5 to 10 years. And our success very much depends on a national provincial government who has an agenda of development. But as for the city of Tshwane, remember, the ANC did get their man in Tshwane. I resigned from parliament. I lost that vote, my first vote to become mayor. And for about a month, I was just an ordinary councillor. And they elected their puppet, chap called Murunwa Makwarela, who was then discovered to be an unrehabilitated insolvent, forged his rehabilitation order. He's now passed away. But we were able to get him out because of his insolvency, and we did a shake-up of the coalition. So yes, Tshwane narrowly avoided the path of Johannesburg and Ekurhuleni, but things are still tough. You are absolutely right. The ANC cannot stand the fact that they're not in charge of Tshwane as the capital city. And even after 2016, they simply didn't want to accept that election result. They used the Gauteng provincial government to place the city under administration, try to manipulate the outcome. It had disastrous results, but I think our coalition in Tshwane has shown ourselves to be resilient. We're bickering less. You're seeing less fights between the DA and Action SA and the Freedom Front Plus and so on. We're holding it together, but I don't take any of this for granted. Every day I wake up and say, we'll do our absolute best with this 2-seat majority to change things. And I think we're making some good progress.
So that we're going to get back to the question of coalitions, because obviously your experience is going to be quite telling, because I think there's going to be a sobering up process towards coalitions, right? Based on experience and certainly voter response to these unstable coalitions. But certainly within the city of Tshwane, you've had enormous problems around water, for example. We start there, and Rooiwal, I didn't know it existed a year ago, and now that's all that's in the news. What is the news on the waterfront? You know, and Hammanskraal, they're sort of coupled on the tote. You keep on hearing the two. Give us an update on what's happening there.
So I'm going to talk about the water situation, but let me just emphasize that everything in Tshwane, as well as other metros in the country, comes down to its financial rescue. We have to match our income with our expenditures, and our trading services, that is electricity, water to a certain extent, waste collection, must generate a small surplus so that we can save and reinvest in infrastructure. If we don't reach that point, it's just going to be continuous decline in service delivery. And that's why we've placed such a strong focus on rebuilding the tax administration system in the city. And I can tell you, Mike, the things that I have seen in the past year, where pockets inside the municipality, little aunties sitting there with a computer, absolutely manipulating processes from in the municipality to stop credit control from happening, or to take bribes, or to facilitate illegal connections. The scale of that, you look at it and you realize just why we are in such deep financial trouble.
What do you do about that?
So we're systematically going through every phase of that revenue value chain, from tariffs that have to be cost reflective and reasonable to the consumer, because you can't just hike prices and say, oh, the problem is solved. It has to be cost reflective. Those costs have to be reasonable. To metering, making sure that we meter consumption, so meter audits, checking illegal connections. And it's because of those illegal connections and the faulty meters that we've got this high Eskom bill, but we're not getting in the money to offset that bill. So metering is very important. The next stage of the revenue value chain is billing. People must get a bill, even if it's just on a cell phone, although many people living in a city nowadays have got smart phones and so forth. So we're building that capability. The expeditious resolution of billing disputes. Now, this sounds like boring stuff. Like, who wants to talk about this? But this is the essence of funding sustainable services. And then the last aspect, of course, is credit control. And we've got this very aggressive campaign called Tshwane Yatima. It will cut you off if you don't pay for services. Tshwane has got one of the most generous offers of free basic services to the poor in the entire country. And we're not going to reduce that offer to the poor. However, we're going to make sure that once that free portion of basic services is exceeded, there must be credit control. And I've made the point, if you don't pay your DSTV, it gets cut off. If you don't pay your Edgar's account, you get a negative mark against your credit record. And we're going to have the same sense of diligence and care so that people prioritize when they use water. So that is the basis of fixing the long-term services. But I do want to get to water.
Yes.
And Rooiwal.
Before we get to the water, sorry, because you brought up an important point,
Yeah.
because I'm sure there's many people that are saying, that are watching this, that are wondering, in the situation where there is some malfeasance and problems at municipal level, that person sitting in the municipal office manipulating those accounts. What is actually the next step? Are people getting arrested? Are people getting charged for that sort of activity?
Yes. So there have been a number of disciplinary cases in the municipality. And when we get to water, I'm going to tell you about that as well. But we've replaced the head of revenue of the municipality. And we've made several arrests, obviously in conjunction with South African police. 2 folks in Garsfontein were arrested for meter tampering, illegal connection. I think yesterday, another set of arrests were made. So if you focus the attention of the political leadership and the senior management on this problem, and this we do every day there's a team of MMCs who go out with disconnection teams, who go out doing meter audits and stuff. If you focus the attention of the organization on these problems, you are going to start uncovering the rot. Our new CFO, permanent appointee, is also a new broom, bringing new energy, rebuilding systems. And what we ultimately want to do, and I'm mindful again not to get too technical, we want to put the entire revenue value chain in a project management office. So I mentioned previously tariffs, metering, billing, credit cut-offs, disconnecting illegal connections and so forth will be managed from one center, and we're actually going to have a room with screens to see in real time how are we getting to our improved revenue targets.
Yeah, I think like all tired South Africans, to harp on the people that you've unearthed inside the organization doing these things. Is that legal process already happening? Because we know that there's a reluctance within the state to hold the state to account.
Yeah.
But is it happening? Are people actually standing before a judge? Or is there...
So, Mike, I've got no control over the courts and the South African police, but we do have control over our own disciplinary processes. And what we often find is when the SIU puts their investigation together, and I want to talk about Rooiwal, they come to us and they say, what has your forensic investigation uncovered? Because there's so little detective capacity, the detectives are overworked, they've got files up to the ceiling. We're happy to share that information, our internal forensic investigations and so forth, and we are taking action. I had a meeting last week, and since the beginning of the year, 17 people in the city have been dismissed for misconduct. I can tell you can go 5 years back, and I promise you, in a decade, you probably didn't have that many people dismissed. So there is a new culture of consequences in the city. And let me segue, if you don't mind, to Rooiwal, which there was that tender that was awarded during a critical period of time to a group of companies associated with state capture accused Edwin Sodi. The city did a forensic investigation. Report served before council in November 2022, and that forensic investigation indicated clearly that this evaluation committee, which looked at the tender, had completely misapplied themselves and given this tender to someone whose offer wasn't suitable to the task. That subsequently was borne out in reality when this consortium walked off site without having completed the project. Now that's separate.
When was that?
So I think the tender was awarded back in 2020.
Yeah, that was under DA administration.
Well, there was a DA administration, but shortly after that, and during critical times, it was the ANC provincial government who was in charge of the city. For 7 months in 2020, it was them. And when this thing could have been set aside, there was no council. So, yes, I accept fully that the tender system in Tshwane, and I think I've said this before, there's been a rot which successive governments have not been able to clean out. But I think we're finally doing it now. Anyway, Rooiwal, the 5 people who served on that evaluations committee, they went through a disciplinary process. It took us almost 2 years. And the disciplinary finding came back and said, no, you suspend them without pay for a month. And the city manager said, absolutely not. This sanction is not justified by the evidence. And his decision has been to suspend them pending a labor court review to get them fired, essentially. Now that is tough action. That's the toughest action a municipality can take. We're also in talks with the SIU. They've asked for us to share evidence of our forensic investigation into this matter. And I hope there's going to be criminal action. We're certainly going to pressure them to do it. But for us immediately, simply getting people out of the office that are doing continuous damage to the municipality is a top priority for us.
Okay, so while that process goes on, There's a treatment plant that's become synonymous with lack of delivery.
Yeah.
Rooiwal's just become the sort of epicenter of the failure of service delivery. What is the state of play with the actual Rooiwal facility now? Is somebody working on it?
Yes. So we've budgeted as much as we can for the upgrade of that facility. We and our resources aren't sufficient to upgrade the plant in its entirety, but we've started the work. We've allocated the money that we can, and what we're trying to see is a progressive improvement in the quality of the effluent that is produced by the plant. It is hydraulically and chemically, biologically overloaded. It should have been upgraded 20 years ago. It wasn't. And as the population has grown, as the infrastructure has deteriorated, the upgrade job has become more and more expensive to a point where the municipality simply doesn't have the resources on our own to do it. That's why we've established a partnership with national government. And despite the political differences that there might be, you've got an ANC Minister of Water, you've got a DA Mayor with a multi-party coalition government. But we've said that it is in our mutual interest to cooperate. We've appointed the DBSA as an implementing agent for the upgrade of the Rooiwal wastewater treatment plant. There's been site handover, construction permits have been issued, a perimeter fence to secure the site is almost completed. And then it will be a matter for us to check deliverables. We've chosen the DBSA.
It's a development bank.
Yes, the Development Bank of Southern Africa, because they've got particular expertise on infrastructure projects, but also because we admitted that there is a rot inside Tshwane's supply chain management system, which we're going to need more time to clean out. So we are using partnerships to increase the accountability and to increase the chances of us delivering a successful project. But Mike, we know that the people of Hammanskraal cannot wait 3 years for the upgrade of that plant. And so the second aspect of our partnership with national government is that Cilliers Water will construct a package plant on the Pienaars River system. So the Rooiwal runs on the Apies River system. The Pienaars River system is another system. Cilliers Water is a water entity, as you know. And what we'll do is divert close the Rooiwal supply area, the Temba supply area, and through the package plant, put clean water in people's taps. And the first phase of that project is to be delivered in September this year, and it will come online in phases. Now, there are, as I've said, 1,000 risks. I've cited a big risk, water tankers, because remember, if people have clean water in their taps, this entire business of water tankers will necessarily be reduced. So they've got a vested interest in not seeing clean water in the taps. And I've said to the minister, you've got to be absolutely sure that we secure that package plant at Cilliers. There might also be tender delays and so forth. But in all honesty, this is the most progress that there has been on fixing the water supply in Hammanskraal in the past 20 years.
Let's move over to the second problem that faces South African local government, and that is the issue around electricity. You know, we're living through this golden period like it's 1999 at the moment. Somehow, Eskom are keeping the lights on. This is unbelievable.
And burning a great
deal of diesel, and we all know what's coming post the election. Because obviously they can't continue to provide us with the electricity they're providing us with now, but it's obviously that wouldn't be good for the politics if the lights had to go out. But we're seeing quite big moves between, in certain cities, certainly Cape Town being the poster child for that, in providing some kind of a localized solution or enhancement to the power situation. Have you even been able to get there yet with Tshwane?
Absolutely. We have made the in-principle decision to lease out 2 mothballed power stations belonging to the city, Pretoria West and Rooiwal. It was supported by the opposition, and we're now in the phase of the plan to get a transactional advisor on board and then to put out a request for proposals to IPPs to say, got Pretoria West. There's not much left of that facility, but it provides an inlet to the grid. So, in other words, excellent for alternative energy generation, whether it be solar or gas. We don't know. We're opening up the offer to the private sector. Rooiwal, substantially still intact. This is right next to the wastewater treatment plant. Massive tract of land. You can still run a coal-fired operation there with minimal upgrades. And it's important to realize that coal will be a part of the energy mix in South Africa for some time to come. Obviously, you must have a plan to phase it out, but this is not Europe, where we say, go cold turkey off of coal immediately. So once we've got that transactional advisor on board, we're going to craft a very well-informed request for proposals. And we believe that between Pretoria West and Rooiwal, we can generate 300, 400 megawatt of electricity. And that's significant. Over a longer period of time, through both the power station project as well as procuring from IPPs, we aim to get 1,000 megawatt of our 2,600 megawatt that we use as a city, independent of Eskom. And even if Eskom improves their performance, remember that we still need to grow. We need to budget for growth. If there isn't sufficient energy supply, so all of these projects that are going on, and I think that's a big reason why we're not having load shedding, is because the private sector is building capacity and taking the load off Eskom. But that's not enough. That's just enough for a short period of time. It's not enough to fuel growth. Because if you want industries to come, if you want to create jobs, we're going to have more electricity supply. So, we're absolutely committed to doing everything in our power to become as independent of Eskom as possible. Now,
Tshwane hasn't been spared the problem of hijacking of buildings. You've just possibly been lucky to have escaped a burning of a building or some of the catastrophes that Johannesburg hasn't. Have you managed to do anything about that in the city of Tshwane?
So immediately when the disaster in Johannesburg happened, it was a wake-up call, obviously, for us as well. We've got a number of buildings, both private and belonging to the city, that are illegally occupied. And it is unfortunate that the law makes it incredibly difficult to get people to safety once they've illegally occupied a piece of land, which is often in a floodplain, or a building that is not structurally sound. And unfortunately, as the courts have interpreted this legislation, much of the obligation of alternative accommodation, so once you get an eviction order, comes down to municipality. So we have our budget process, we've got our development plan, we consult communities, we're on a shoestring budget, we only get 10% of the fiscal transfers, and then you get a court ruling, even on private land, which says, no, you as a municipality must provide alternative accommodation. And it is time that Parliament clarifies what is the obligation of municipalities, but also it must be more difficult for land grabbers to establish themselves. We have this picture in our mind that it's just vulnerable people who do the best they can in order to get shelter, but very often you've got shack farming, and you've got people with Range Rovers who plot out land and then organize for land grabs to happen. You've got landlords collecting rent on dilapidated buildings. So we've done that audit. We're going to do as much as we possibly can within the very limited framework that the law provides us. But we're also going to sharpen up our delinquent buildings bylaw. We've got an existing bylaw, but I've taken advice on it, and they say it does need some amendments. And we'll push the boundaries. But the national legislation has to change because it makes it extremely easy for land grabbers, for shack farmers, for other criminal syndicates to occupy land, and it makes it extremely difficult for municipalities to get eviction orders and to safeguard land against illegal occupation.
Yeah, well, look, on all of these issues, only as a Johannesburg resident, many of the followers of the State of the Nation will know I've always lived in Johannesburg and kind of like the place. For once, I'm pulling for...
Have you had your mayor on here yet?
No, the mayor, I'm still waiting for him to answer my many calls. No,
okay.
The mayor, we'll keep trying. much like we try and get him and Kenny Kunene as well. We also said at one point he would come on, but then you don't get your second call answered. So, the only mayor I can get hold of is the ex-mayor, the ex sort of your counterpart in the DA on here. And but the point being that, certainly as a desperate Johannesburg resident, it's important that Tshwane does well to shine a light on Johannesburg's shortcomings, right? Because I think that while we had that period, nearly 25 years of it, of the ANC controlling all of these metros, they could all sink at a similar pace, and one wouldn't look out of place. But obviously, if one of the major metros here in Gauteng does well, it shines a real light on the others that are doing poorly. And in actual fact, the problem is with Cape Town running quite well, it's too distant. Right, I think even a successful Tshwane would put pressure on eThekwini and Mangaung and some of these other metros that are run equally poorly.
But Cape Town also has the benefit of 20 years of excellent government, working like compound interest. So
absolutely, and
it's
also
a bit of a different ball game.
It's a different ball game, and also one of the problems, and it's coming to a country near you, and that is that even if the government changes in South Africa in the forthcoming elections, the new government has got a game on their hands because so much is ruined and so much rot exists in the system that even if you had the best leader in the world taking over South Africa, it's going to be absolutely difficult to turn this ship around because it's in such deep mud at the moment, as I see it. Which brings us to the next point, and now we've kind of using city of Tshwane as a bit of a backdrop, because we are heading towards general elections, and one of the key features is going to be coalition government, right? And like I said, used this saying so many times because I had JJ Tabani on here. We were talking coalitions, and when I asked him what he thought of coalitions, he gave me the perfect answer, which was it doesn't matter what he thinks or what I think about coalitions that are going to happen, because the voters are not going to give a majority to one party. Therefore, there's going to have to be some kind of cooperation at least. Now, you've had to manage some difficult coalitions, and do you find that coalitions are perhaps turning a corner?
Let me just mention this. Coalitions are unstable. They are unpredictable. They're certainly not romantic.
Let's be fair.
There's an inherent. Well, let me defend my point. Yeah. There's an inherent instability to coalitions, especially because we're a young coalition country. Yes. We haven't got this 100 years. We haven't gone through civil war where there's certain bonds created across party political allegiance and so forth. But in politics, it's always compared to what? Coalitions compared to what? Compared to continuing ANC one-party dominance, continuing state capture, corruption, self-enrichment, decline of the developmental capacity of the state, schools, hospitals, roads, infrastructure. We have to break the stasis and, in fact, the decline that has become a feature of South African life under an ANC-dominant party democracy. And if you break up any kind of stasis or a stale situation like that, you are going to have a bit of unpredictability, a bit of chaos, a bit of uncertainty. But in that, you are presented with opportunities to change things. So coalitions get a bad rap because of Joburg, where unfortunately in 2021 the voters did not give any one party or any one coalition bloc a sufficient mandate to take over and to continue the cleanup operation that had been started in 2016. Ekurhuleni was the same situation. But we forget that in 2006, Cape Town under Helen Zille was a coalition. It was a spectacularly successful coalition, despite a lot of instability. And so the majority of coalitions that are governing parts of this country are in fact successful. Unfortunately, we focus on the unsuccessful ones. I think in Tshwane, there has been a lot of manipulation by the ANC, and the ANC, as John Steenhuisen says, are master manipulators. 2016, they simply didn't accept the election result in Joburg, in Tshwane, in Nelson Mandela Bay. And in Tshwane, they sought to manipulate the outcome. Again, no party got a clear majority. They collapsed council meetings working with the EFF. That opened the door for intervention by the Gauteng provincial government. It was a disastrous period in the city. So when the ANC says, oh, look how your coalition has done in Tshwane, they've got to take co-responsibility for the damage that they have done, for their manipulation tactics in the capital city. But I think in Tshwane, we now have a stable coalition. It has been informed, as has the multi-party charter for South Africa, by all of the lessons we've learned about coalitions. And I think that initiative of the multi-party charter is the best chance for holding it together and for forming a strong voting bloc after the election. Whether we win nationally or not, it forms a strong bloc where we can negotiate crucial changes that have to happen. You mentioned that it's going to be very, very difficult taking over to make changes, but you've got to identify the levers, the one or two key things. And for me, it would be procurement and personnel, because those are the avenues through which government delivers services. If you can't change the personnel, if you can't get rid of the deployed cadres, then a coalition will be ineffective. If you can't reform the procurement system to get value for taxpayers' money, we're still going to sit with BEE tenderpreneurs becoming rich off government payroll. So it's going to be crucially important that a new government has got a clear idea of what it is going to do with power and to focus on those key levers in order to produce change as soon as possible.
But now, with so much focus, emphasis, anger almost being laid at the door of coalitions not delivering, have you seen any change of behavior amongst people who in the past were quite cavalier in their attitudes towards coalitions? Are you detecting a better behavior pattern? Not just amongst all parties that would be involved in coalitions, whether they be your coalitions or the other side?
Yes. So I think most of the anger in this country is directed towards the ANC, right, not towards coalitions. People might be disappointed that coalitions haven't achieved what they ought to have, or what the expectation was, cleaning up the full ANC mess. But I think people also appreciate that this country was run down over a period of 20 or more years. And it's not going to be like that for us to fix it. So, I do think the public understand. South African people aren't stupid. They do have an instinctive sense that the manipulation by the ANC has to stop. And the only way that can stop is if we cut the ANC's power. As for have coalitions improved? I think that the multi-party charter for South Africa has significantly improved the relationship between those parties that share, broadly speaking, the values of non-racialism, a social market economy, a capable state, and the rule of law. Those are the four key principles for the DA in going into coalitions. A little bit more than a year ago, I was national spokesperson of the DA, and we were bickering with Corne Mulder and Michael Beaumont about whether or not to bring Gayton McKenzie into the coalition or not. That is behind us. Everyone has seen through Gayton McKenzie and the Patriotic Alliance. They're no longer driving wedges in between the key parties in our coalition. We're no longer bickering over small little things, and where we are, the majority of the public attention is what is the public offer. So I think the multi-party charter for South Africa, the Moonshot Pact as it was initially conceived, is a game changer. And the key is going to be in holding it together. And again, even if we don't win a majority in a national election, that voting bloc can still exercise considerable power to make certain key changes, whether we are in government or not.
Yeah, but and your sense of the temperature amongst voters, given the fact that we have seen some coalition destabilizers. You mentioned the Patriotic Alliance, that seems to be their stock in trade. is destabilizing coalitions. The EFF and their constant
the Patriotic Alliance's stock in trade is finding out the most profitable way to sell out to the ANC. That's the reason for their existence. But the feeling on the ground is very good. I obviously spend most of my time on municipal issues. I am going to get stuck in the campaign, but the city and fixing the city and holding that coalition together is my most important priority. My election will be in 2026. But the sense I do get from people speaking to Salim Samanga, the DA premier candidate for Gauteng, he says that he is feeling a positive vibe as he did last in 2016 when we made that big breakthrough in the metros. We didn't get this sense of energy in 2019, which was quite honestly a disappointing election result. And I was saying to somebody the other day, I remember back in 2019, we were getting Tony Leon to Gauteng to hold our traditional support base together. Now the ANC is bringing Thabo Mbeki to Gauteng to hold their base together.
Yeah.
So I very much get a positive sense. There is momentum. And I think as we get closer to the election, the old ANC tactics of scaremongering, the ANC telling people if you vote for another party, we'll take away your social grant or your old age pension, that kind of stuff is not going to have the impact that it had previously because people are seeing through the manipulation.
Just, as we head towards the end over here, you mentioned earlier something which 5 years ago perhaps we wouldn't even have been discussing, and that is the injection into the discussion by the provincial government. Now, quite honestly, the outcome of the provincial elections is going to be very, very interesting to watch because at least 5 of the provinces are absolutely in play. Sadly, including the Western Cape, which seems to be in play for a different reason. But let's keep our focus up here. We have seen some intense politicking by Panyaza Lesufi, the Gauteng Premier, where he has thrown the kitchen sink at it and spending money which... Do you have any idea where this money is coming from for him to offer jobs sort of willy-nilly to anyone he sees on the side of the road?
Well, I think we've had a hint of where it comes from. When you look at all of the children's homes and other social development projects which have been supported by the province in the past that are now being defunded, getting more and more people homes for the elderly and for people who are vulnerable, who say that the Gauteng provincial government has simply withdrawn their funding. It has in fact been the biggest unspoken scandal of this administration, and I think that Panyaza Lesufi is still to be held fully accountable for what his government is doing in terms of taking social care and channeling that money towards a political patronage. But this is an indication of the desperation, how much trouble the ANC and Gauteng are in. They're making wild promises. We saw the same kind of behavior in Tshwane in the run-up to 2016, and it didn't work. Because, again, people are seeing through the manipulation. There's a difference between real jobs generated by the private sector because there's confidence in the future of the economy, because there's certainty about electricity, because schools are properly resourced and school governing bodies can do what they have to do in order to produce excellent results, and simply giving people EPWP jobs that are temporary, that are insecure, that don't necessarily always give the transfer of skills. So people are seeing the manipulation, but you can expect quite a lot more from Mr. Lesufi if his record is to be continued.
Now, I was on Saturday confronted with a delegation of, as they colloquially known, Amapanyazas, these Kits constables, police sort of security force that he's now put in place, in gleaming new BMW X3s that they're driving around in. Do you have the same thing in the city of Tshwane?
Well, let's talk about the principle. Should provinces invest in law enforcement? And I think absolutely, policing powers should be devolved to provinces, provided they do it well, provided they use the little resources, and believe me, provinces also get shafted by the national government when it comes to intergovernmental transfer. So you've got only so much, and you've got to optimize those resources. The Western Cape government, the City of Cape Town, have got what they call the LEAP program, where they are using all resources they possibly can to put trained officers in the field to help with law enforcement. And this is already producing excellent results. Now, I don't know if Panyaza Lesufi saw this and said to himself, maybe this is something we can copy and paste. But in the execution of this program, obviously there's much to be desired. You need trained officers. You need to have proper resources. The BMW could have bought many other things that are far more useful in law enforcement. It could have bought drones, for example, which is essential to policing nowadays. So I think in the execution, what Panyaza had in mind was, let me just do anything in the run-up to the election, even if all the paint comes off the wall after the result, at least we'll maximize our result. So I think it's an unfortunate thing. I don't want to disparage these officers. We must try and make the best of it. I've seen in certain instances they've come and assisted with Tshwane, but we've also tried to give some direction to say, these are the principles of law enforcement and so forth. What is a bit disappointing is wherever Lesufi goes, like he can go watch a rugby or a soccer game at Loftus, and then you suddenly see the concentration of these folks. And so you get the impression that it's a scheme around a personality, and that's what we don't want. We want something that will work regardless of who the premier is. And he's got enough VIP protection officers. He doesn't need the Amapanyazas to be skulking around wherever he goes.
Yeah, it's starting to look a little bit like a militia. What is really concerning is that we recently interviewed Velenkosini Tlabisa, and he's saying, look, down in KZN, they might as well start their own police force because it's been allowed to happen in Gauteng. This could be quite interesting and quite worrying in actual fact if you suddenly have militias pitching up in some of these volatile provinces. But Cilliers Brink, thank you so much for coming here. I know you've had a touch of the flu and you still made it. Some people haven't even made it. So to Mayor Cilliers Brink, thank you so much for joining us, keeping us updated with the city of Tshwane. As we head into the election, ladies and gentlemen, I think we've got to keep an eye still. Let's not forget that many of these metros are hamstrung quite dramatically by the central government, especially certain disciplines that are managed by central government and certain budgets. So we won't forget about the metros as we cover the elections. We can do both at the same time. Cilliers Brink, thank you so much for joining us.
Great pleasure, Mike. Thanks so much.
To everybody, go and rent a car at Pace Car Rental, and we'll see you again on the State of the Nation. Thank you very much.